Hey everyone, today we're taking a break from Long War 2 classes to get into the Halloween spirit. We're going to try to beat XCOM 2 War of the Chosen during a zombie apocalypse. And I've been really sick lately, my voice may not be 100% back to how it normally is. I apologise for that, I hope you can still enjoy the video. Now when I say zombies, I'm referring to the Lost. And as you can see here on the Gatecrasher mission, there is indeed a lot of Lost. Essentially the idea of the run is that the Lost are taking over the planet, so we need to topple Advent, as we normally would, while also contending with this undead menace. I won't really talk about the rules today, which may be a first for me. We're doing the normal thing, Honest Man, and playing on Commander difficulty. Instead, I want to talk more about exactly what changes I've made to the game. And the first one is probably pretty obvious. We've added the Lost to every mission. Well, not every mission because I messed up some of the mod settings, but pretty much every mission. We've also installed the World War L mod that makes the Lost a lot more dangerous. There's new enemy types, including the Brute here, who is quite slow moving, but he has a lot of HP and can hit really hard. In addition, Dashers can now wall run. That means they don't need a ladder to be able to climb up to us. So our usual trick of blocking off pipes and ladders, cutting off the Lost's access, that's not going to work this time. Also, any humanoid who gets Shadow Realmed by a Lost will be raised as a zombie on the Lost's side. Now that applies to both our units and Advent, and probably civilians too, now that I think about it. And finally, the mod also adds different cosmetics to the Lost. There's police officers, cheerleaders, even clowns. It's pretty cool. Now, in addition to this mod, I've also doubled the damage output of all Lost. So an attack that would normally inflict 2 HP of damage is now going to inflict 4 HP. And that means in the early game, even the weakest Lost will most likely one-shot our troops if they land an attack. I'm also using the Fair Lost targeting mod. In the regular game, the Lost have a 70% chance of targeting XCOM and only a 30% chance of going after Advent. With this mod installed, the chance is now 50-50, so the Lost are just as deadly to the aliens as they are to us. I've also unshackled the enemy AI. Now normally in the game, if you're playing on Commander difficulty or lower, the game will limit how many enemies will engage you at once. And that's why when you've activated, say, 3 pods at the same time, you've got 100 enemies on the map, you'll see some of the bad guys will just run around not doing anything on their turn instead of attacking you. The reason that happens is because of shackling. The game limits how many enemies will attack so that you don't get squad wiped in one turn. Now I'm not sure if the Lost are affected by shackling or not, but just to make sure that it won't happen, I've turned it off for this run. It's gonna be a regular occurrence that we'll be getting swarmed by bad guys, and we want this to feel like a proper zombie apocalypse. Endless hordes descending upon us. And finally, I've banned the Between the Eyes resistance order for this run. I think it would make things too easy. Now I think that's all the changes I've made, so with all that out of the way, let's get into this thing. Now immediately on the first mission, I realised that one big issue in this run is going to be Lost hiding underneath us when we're on the high ground. The Dashers can climb up to reach us on their turn and potentially one-shot our units, so we really don't want to leave them alive. Now with this in mind, I send Ato down to ground level to deal with some of the Lost that are hiding inside the building. And she's able to do this to an extent, but there's still plenty of other Lost down there, so I send our skirmisher Sinpai to help clear out the zombies. The problem is, in doing so, I've placed him close enough to one of the Lost to get instantly one-shot. And this was such a bad play. Like, I saved the life of Ato the rookie by sacrificing our far more valuable skirmisher. Yeah, definitely not the smartest move. Now, I did consider restarting the campaign here, but we'll persevere, see how we go. This shouldn't be a run-ender. But then, to add salt to the wound, Jojo is forced to gun down the zombie version of Senpai. That's his teammate. That's got to be traumatic. Now, the good news is that by this point in the mission, the Lost have actually dealt with the usual Advent pods. They've wiped them out completely. And you'll also notice here the cloud of poison. Brutes will actually release poison clouds whenever they take damage, so that's one more thing that we need to be mindful about. Anyway, that's Gatecrasher done. Let's head to the first council mission, and you'll see that the map looks a bit different. I'm using some map mods on this run just to mix things up a bit, keep the game visually interesting when I've played it like 1,000 times. Now, Dreadnought here has tracer rounds, and we've picked these up really early. I think with the World War L mod, some Lost can drop helpful loot. Of course, in this case, it doesn't prove very helpful since he still blows our concealment with an 85% miss. So that was totally worth it. And as the mission plays out here, I should tell you this footage is actually from over a year ago. This video was intended to be released in October of 2023, but real life got in the way of that and it didn't happen. But hey, better late than never, right? Then we have this thing, which is a Howler. Now, it can use an action to scream, and that reduces the Lost spawn timer by 1 turn. Basically the same effect as if you had used a grenade. So these things can be dangerous. We want to deal with them as quickly as we can when we see them. And thankfully, seeing as this is not a solo class run, we have plenty of versatility at our disposal. Now, when the Lost do spawn in, as they're going to eventually, I actually charge at them with Ato. Now, this may seem counterintuitive. These guys are melee units and they do huge damage. We probably want to keep our distance. But she's got a shotgun, so the closer that Ato is, the more likely that she is to hit. And honestly, dashes can move quite far with this mod, so they're probably going to reach us next turn either way. We might as well get a bit closer and maximize our chance to hit. So Ato takes her very first shot, and it's a 91% that she misses. Now I remind you, we sacrificed a skirmisher for this woman. That's not seeming like a good trade at this stage. However, not everything is bad news. There are additional soldiers that have spawned on this map, and once again, because it's not a solo class run, we can actually use them. So we encounter Old Man, no doubt a hardened survivor of the zombie apocalypse with a name like that, and he does clear out some dashes, but eventually XCOM luck, or maybe it's just my luck, either way it catches up and he misses a 79% shot. Then our boy Drifter misses a 71%. We just cannot hit this last dasher. Our only chance is Dreadnought with his pistol, and he thankfully saves the day. He rolls maximum damage to rob the dasher of its 3 HP. So a little bit of redemption for Dreadnought there. That was a close call. We eventually make it to the VIP, and we even pick up the second extra soldier on the way. So we're now in control of 6 units, which is really nice. And we're probably going to need them because our best buddy Ato here manages to miss a point-blank 98% shot. That's a 91 and 98 in the same mission. Senpai, I'm really sorry. Sacrificing you was clearly a mistake. And so our new recruit actually has to bail Ato out. Now Drifter tries to deal with 2 dashes inside a nearby house, but he's only able to hit 1. And all these misses could be because our soldiers are blind this run. I mean, Ato certainly is. But honestly, I think what's going on is just long run proportion. We're having to slaughter so many Lost, and the more shots that we make, well, eventually one of those high percentage hits is going to miss. That's just how probability works. So even though it is frustrating, we're probably making as many hits as we can. Again, with the exception of Ato. Then I actually do something pretty cool, at least I think so. I use the VIP to get squad sight on more Lost with our sniper Jojo. And I was proud of myself for this. The civilian is actually helping us out in combat. That doesn't happen too often. Now it's the Lost's turn, and I am actually worried about them one-shotting us, to the point that I gave Drifter blast padding. Yeah, I genuinely thought it would be more helpful than Shredder in the early game. Most of the Lost don't have armor, so Shredder's probably not that helpful. And the fact that I'm going with blast padding, these truly are frightening times. But it ends up being for naught. Old Man is actually a specialist, so we're able to protect Drifter with aid protocol, and the Lost misses its attack anyway. These extra soldiers really saving our bacon here. We then head for the evac, and everyone makes it out alive. And I have to say, if we hadn't picked up those 2 extra soldiers on the battlefield, I think this one would have been a disaster. Luckily, we avoided that. So next up is the retaliation mission. By this point, we've unlocked squad size 1, so we can have 5 troops instead of 4. And it's at this point that I decide to dress most of the soldiers up in the Tactical Legacy Pack DLC armor. It's got a nice Mad Max look to it, and I think it fits perfectly for this run. Once we deploy, the Warlock is our first chosen, and his abilities are pretty crazy. He's immune to melee, and he regenerates lost health. So the thing that's interesting here is that the Lost cannot hurt this guy. Now his weaknesses are skirmishes and shell-shocked. Of course, the thing about shell-shocked is that every time we use a grenade, that's going to bring in more Lost. More Lost that can attack us, but are going to do absolutely nothing to him. So his abilities honestly seem pretty much perfect for this run. And when I say that, I mean perfect for him. They're honestly pretty horrible for us. Now Scarlet Boy gets into the spirit of the run, and he spawns in a zombie. And you can see the map is this dense forest area. It's a pretty cool one. As the mission proceeds, we end up on the roof of, I think, what is the only building on the entire map. Now we've got the Warlock and Dreadnought, who is mind-controlled, on one side, the Lost are coming in from the front, and a Faceless has revealed at our rear. So we're surrounded by enemies on almost every side. This really is like holding up for dear life in the apocalypse. Now the Warlock has too much health, and the trees are offering him too much full cover, so there's just no way we're finishing him this turn. We can wipe out the Faceless though, so that's something, and then Dreadnought takes out a civilian rather than attacking our troops, and I'm honestly going to take that as a win at this point in time. Come our turn, more Lost have arrived, so we spend most of our time dealing with them. Now Wacky Joker is able to flank the Warlock, and he does a whopping 2 damage with his pistol. So needless to say, the Warlock is surviving until the next turn. A Priest uses Sustain on Joker, but I'm actually happy about that. He was flanked by the Warlock and Dreadnought, so he could have taken damage, but inside the stasis he's going to be protected. Instead, Dreadnought turns his attention to Red Devil, and he lands with a massive 4 damage crit. Now that's with his pistol, so his did twice as much damage as ours. That sounds like XCOM to me. So once again our turn rolls around, and we're finally able to finish the Warlock off. So no more mind control to worry about, which is really nice. We do still have to get rid of the Priest, but before we're able to mop him up, even more Lost spawn in. The amount of enemies we're having to deal with is just relentless. And even though it takes a really long time, we are able to take them all out, and everyone survives the encounter. So with that mission done, before too long we have a supply raid, and this is pretty cool. We've taken out a Stun Lancer, but his sectoid buddy raises him as a zombie. Now in his zombie form, the Lost end up eliminating him, and that causes him to revive again, this time as a Lost zombie. This dude has been resurrected from the grave twice in one mission. But not to worry, we're able to finally put him to rest once and for all, through the power of gunfire. Soon it's another council mission, and we end up activating a pod with a trooper and a Viper, plus a bunch of Lost. Now like I said, this run was from a while ago, and back then I didn't realise that the Viper Poison Spit doesn't need line of sight in order to hit our troops. So because of this, and because our troops are too far away from the bad guys to deal with them effectively, My plan is to just break line of sight on Advent. My thinking is, if they can't see us, they can't attack us. Now I am able to accomplish this. We break line of sight and Advent do indeed not attack us, if that's the right way to say that sentence. The problem is the lost dashes and just how ridiculously far they can move. They end up charging our Templar, and 2 hits is all it takes to send her to the Shadow Realm. Our hero units really aren't having a good time this run. And of course, since she was taken out by Lost, she comes back as a zombie, and for the second time, we're forced to open fire on our own soldier. This is pretty brutal. Now fortunately, there's no further losses on the mission, and the rest of the team make it out safe and sound. But I have learned an important lesson from this one. Dashes are super dangerous, and we need to make them a priority whenever we see them. So basically the same thing I said about the Howlers. I'm sensing a recurring theme here. Alright, now we're going to head into the Blacksite and make some story progress. And while we do that, I'll take a second to talk about how I've gotten the Lost to appear on so many missions. I used a mod that let me customize what sitreps would spawn on missions and how often. So I was able to make either the Lost sitrep or the Horde sitrep trigger for almost every mission. Now I say almost because the mod doesn't actually affect story missions. So for those, I had to go into the mission INI files on my PC and manually add in a bunch of Lost to the enemy spawn lists. And you can see here it did work as they activate on the Blacksite. Now the downside to doing it this way is that there's no Lost countdown. As in, there's no more Lost that are going to spawn in on the story missions. It's just a matter of dealing with the ones that are already there. I just didn't know how to add that feature in. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's the best that I could do, and I did add in quite a few Lost, so we're still going to have our hands full. On top of that, the usual Advent pods are still here, so we're going to have to deal with those as well. We move onto the roof of the main structure, and there's more Lost waiting for us up there. Now they move in towards us, but a few of them very stupidly throw themselves through the glass and down to the floor below, where they're not going to be able to reach us on their turn. So not very good strategy on their part, but you know, they're brainless zombies, so what do you expect, I guess? But honestly, things do go kind of sideways here. See, we can deal with the Lost on the roof easily enough, but on the enemy turn, the pod with the mech activates. Now, since the Lost are in the building with the bad guys, they seem to focus on the zombies, and they move out of our line of sight, namely the mech, so I don't know where it is. That's really bad. On top of that, apparently there are a bunch of dashes with those Lost that we activated, and they charge straight for us. Now, I was really afraid we were losing someone here, but we get really lucky, and even though the dashes can reach our position, they're not able to attack this turn. So naturally, I focus on getting rid of the Lost that are in
close range.
And then I decide that we need to get the mech. We're able to find it and take it down easily enough, and things are honestly looking pretty good now. We've gotten rid of most of the dangerous enemy units, plus we've removed all the Lost that were close enough to attack us on the next turn, so we should be okay. And it's here I decide to use the Lost Lure. And yeah, I know I pronounced that word weird. You'll just have to deal with it, I'm sorry. Now this item, obviously I've brought one on the mission with us. Up until this campaign, I just didn't understand how this thing worked. I used it once during my first ever War of the Chosen playthrough. It didn't seem to do anything, and so I never used it again. But the reason it didn't do anything is because I was actually using it the wrong way. See, I thought you threw it at the Lost and it would get all of them hit by the AoE to move to the center of the target zone. But that's not correct. How it actually works is quite a bit different. You don't target the Lost with this thing at all. You target Advent. Any Advent units caught in the radius will then be targeted by the Lost on the next turn. And so that's exactly what happens. I used the lure on the 2 remaining Advent troops, and sure enough, the Lost that are still alive make a beeline for them. And this is one of the things I really enjoy about doing these runs. If I hadn't played a Lost Apocalypse campaign, I would probably never have learned how this item works. But now I know, and that's really cool. So once we finally dealt with all of the Lost, we still have the Warlock to contend with. He begins by mind-scorching Jojo and Harbinger. Harbinger is our replacement skirmisher, and the Warlock also summons a Stun Lancer to back him up. The first order of business is reviving our mind-scorched soldiers, which Wacky Joker can do, and then Cowboy Deleter makes this absurd 71% shot, and he just one-shots the Stun Lancer with massive damage. This was so good. So I think by this stage we're out of grenades, and the Skullet Man has taken up full cover, so obviously we have no way of getting rid of it. Instead, we're just going to move in to close the distance as best we can, but of course this is a slow process, and it gives the Warlock the opportunity to summon Spectral Lancers and retreat into his safety bubble. It's not a big deal though, all he's really doing is delaying the inevitable. We can take out the Spectrals, and we can finish off the Warlock on the same turn. He may have slowed us down, but he didn't stop us. And having a skirmisher inflict extra damage on him, that certainly helps. Then it's just a matter of grabbing the vial and evacing out, and we're able to escape without even having to deal with the reinforcements. So a really good outing here. We showed those zombies who's boss. Before long, it's another retaliation mission, and it takes place on this really interesting map. And by interesting, I mean horrific. There's a dock with a boat, and the rest of the map is basically just flat swampland with very little cover. And so that's going to really limit our positioning. Once we leave the dock, we're going to be extremely vulnerable to flanking from the bad guys because the area is so open. Nevertheless, as much as I would like to, we cannot stay on the dock forever. The bad guys are out there in the swamp and they are gunning down civilians every turn. So we need to venture out there to find them and take them out. So I send Drifter out, and we not only activate a Berserker and 2 Mutons, but the civilian that we were trying to save ends up being faceless. Now we're able to wipe out the faceless and one of the Mutons. I then use a Mimic Beacon to distract the remaining enemies, but what happens next is truly messed up. 2 enemy pods patrol into us on the enemy turn, and 1 Advent soldier from each of these pods takes aim at the Mimic Beacon. Now the counterattack Dark Event is active, but that's supposed to allow them to enter Overwatch upon being revealed, not actually fire their weapon. So I'm guessing it's some weird jank between counterattack giving them an action, and then the Meme Beacon forcing them to attack it. But whatever's going on here, it's honestly garbage. Because it means the Berserker finishes the beacon off, and that leaves the Muton free to attack our soldiers. I was really annoyed by this. Now thankfully the big boy takes aim at a civilian and not us, so we haven't taken any damage, that's a good thing, but we are racking up losses on the civvy side. We don't want to lose too many more. That's going to be easier said than done since we have 8 active enemies right now. And I mentioned I turned off shackling, right? Alright, so we start with a flashbang from Drifter to disorient some of the more dangerous enemies. I then decide to use Harbinger's grappling hook. We're going to grapple onto the roof of the boat. Now that's going to leave her out of cover, which is extremely dangerous, but I figure the aim bonus from the height advantage will be worth it. Sadly, I am immediately proven wrong as she misses a 96% whiplash attack. What a truly despicable specimen she is. I really wish Senpai was here. Now against my better judgment, I use an aid protocol on Harbinger. As much as I despise her in this moment, keeping her alive is probably better than not, I guess. Then I misclick with Arctic and I leave her out of cover, so probably should have saved the aid protocol for her. But despite my screw up, she thankfully hits her 99% attack and eliminates the mech. Then I spam enough grenades and a lure to bring in more Lost. The lure will ensure the Lost target Advent and not us, and I'm just hoping that Advent target the Lost in return. Now the plan mostly works and the enemy turn isn't nearly as bad as it could be. The shield bearers do their shield thing, so we haven't taken any damage there. One of the Berserkers does hit Drifter for decent damage, that's not good, but the rest of the bad guys fortunately go for the Lost. Now even though we've survived that turn, we are still very far from safe. With the Lost here, there's even more enemies we need to worry about, and on our turn, the only advent we can eliminate is a single Berserker. The shield bearers are quite far back and they're in cover, so hitting them is really difficult for our troops. And so because we can't get rid of the shield bearers, that means we can't remove the shields from the rest of the bad guys. That just makes it too difficult to finish anyone else off. And so all this leads to a fairly terrible enemy turn. Drifter gets attacked by the second Berserker. Now I did heal him on our turn and the attack is actually a dodge, so he takes hardly any damage. But despite being a dodge, the attack still knocks him out. I'm not sure I've ever seen that before. Then Harbinger eats a crit from one of the shield bearers. Now she does survive, but I honestly wouldn't be that bothered if she hadn't. Drifter was able to deploy another lure before he went down, so we don't have to worry about the Lost, thankfully. They're attacking Advent. Problem is, they're not really doing too much damage. Those shields are getting in the way of the Lost as well. We can use Revival Protocol and bring Drifter back into the fight, so that gives us a full team once again. And then I just decide to spam even more grenades to bring in even more Lost. At this point, they're pretty much the only thing keeping us alive, which is a weird thing to say, so I figure the more of them the better, as long as we have lures. Now Drifter puts in some good work and he one-shots the shield bearer. We're also able to finally eliminate the second Berserker, so this is really taking the pressure off. All the remaining enemies are further away from us, and they're surrounded by Lost, so there's a really good chance they're going to target the zombies instead of us. Now Drifter wasn't the only soldier with a lure, so we can use another one to of course keep the Lost focused on Advent. And you can see how swarmed the aliens are getting. Now it's taken a while, but the Lost are finally starting to inflict some decent damage because there is just so many of them. On our next turn, I decide we need to start thinning out the Lost's numbers since I'm expecting Advent to be gone pretty soon. And once there's no Advent left, those lures aren't going to be very helpful to us. I mean, we could throw them at a civilian, I guess. Then on the enemy turn, another group of Lost appear. And the zombies finally take down the Muton, just like I thought they would. The shield bearer does survive though. I'm pretty sure it's the only Advent unit left. Well, him and another Faceless that unveils. We've used up all our lures by this stage, so we just need to wipe out as many Lost as we can. We do not want to get hit by these things. And Blue here goes absolutely beast mode. She cuts down a huge amount of them. I honestly lost count of how many Lost that she slaughtered in this one turn. This woman is amazing. Now the issue that we have is the shield bearer keeps falling back away from our position. And for whatever reason, the Lost just are not doing their job and getting rid of him. And we want to eliminate this guy quickly because the longer that he's around, the more Lost that are just going to keep appearing. So we need to play things a bit risky. And I end up pushing forward quite aggressively. This leads to Arctic taking a hit. Now she is still alive, so it's all good so far. And I do have to say, Cowboy Deleter, our specialist, he has been coming in clutch this whole mission, just healing the other troops and keeping them in the fight. So it's our turn again, we move in with Arctic, and she one-shots that shield bearer into oblivion. And that's it, we pull out the victory. This was an absolutely brutal mission, by far the hardest of the run, and it was mostly just because of the layout of the map. 3 pods at once with extremely limited cover and positioning was really tough. And ironically, even though the Lost are meant to be the big threat in this run, it was actually the lures that saved us. We owe our survival to the zombies. What a world. A few missions later, and we have a pretty interesting scenario. This council mission has the Horde sitrep, but it's also the first outing in the Hunter's territory. So it's going to be him, us, and a whole bunch of zombies. Now the Hunter's strengths are General, Revenge, and Shadow Step. His weaknesses are Groundling and Reapers. Now Revenge is always annoying, but the rest of his abilities aren't too bad. We should be able to handle this. And this display with Ato I think is pretty cool. She's finally starting to pull her weight. 3 lost charger and she just instantly blade storms all of them into oblivion. Very nicely done. Then she finds herself in the evac zone quite a distance from the rest of the team. See, my big-brained plan was to use a lure on the hunter to get the Lost to attack him. The problem is, once I move Ato onto the roof, she doesn't actually have line of sight on the edgy boy, so my plan is a complete fail. So instead I use aid protocol to keep her safe, and then I actually opt to hunker down. Now when I did this I was paying attention to Twitch chat and I didn't realise her gun was out of ammo. So reloading probably would have been the better play, or at least that's what you'd think. See, the hunter activates on the enemy turn and he summons in some troopers. Afterwards I'm expecting him to attack Ato, but he actually doesn't. He just runs around for a bit instead. He doesn't do anything. And I'm guessing he didn't bother attacking her since her defense was so high. So it's possible that my absent-minded hunkering down, though completely unintentional, may have actually been the right move after all. On our turn, we grenade the hunter and we send him to ground level. From here the squad opens fire and we take him down pretty easily. And then I'm able to use a lure on the advent troops. Now the lure actually reduces the timer on incoming Lost, just like it was a grenade. My hope was that by using it, another Lost pod would spawn, giving the troopers something to target besides Ato. I don't think there's any Lost actually left on the map at this point in time. Now sadly, it doesn't happen. The Lost are still too far away from spawning. We don't get them charging in. So our girl Ato is well and truly exposed here. The troopers have the flank, one of them even has the height advantage, but for whatever reason, they don't attack. They choose to go on Overwatch instead. Now once they do that, then the Lost pod decides to finally show up, and they instantly eat the Overwatch for us. So these troops could have easily put Ato in the ground here, and I have no idea why they didn't. She wasn't hunkering down here, so I don't know, this was weird, but I'm gonna take it. Ato seemingly having really good luck this mission. So we rush the evac zone and we leave the Lost and Advent to fight it out amongst themselves. Actually, that may not be true. I think the Lost have slaughtered all of the Advent and turned them into zombies by the time we get to the evac zone. But whatever, that's semantics. The point is, against all odds, everyone has somehow made it out alive of this mission. Before too long, I decide to hit the Warlock's base. And you can see here from the Shadow Chamber, the enemies are just lost. Like I said, I modified the INI files myself, and for these lost bases, I removed Advent and just packed in legions of Lost. Lots of tight spaces. I'm thinking this should make for a fun fight. Let's see how it goes. Now, immediately as the mission starts, the Lost swarm us, but the good thing about them is they can't use cover. And as our soldiers level up and as we get access to better gear, it's very easy for us to hit the Lost, unlike in the early game. So even though there's a lot of them, we're able to keep them at bay without too much trouble. And then it turns out that there are some Advent units on this map after all. It turns out turrets can still spawn in. Thankfully on this one they're not too bad and we can eliminate them pretty easily. So we can then head to the final chamber, and I've filled this place with Lost as well. The first step is to eliminate the dashers. They can climb onto the platform in the middle of the room. The regular Lost cannot wall run, so we can use the usual trick of standing at the ladders and cutting off their access to us. I'm wanting to keep the regular Lost alive since they're not too dangerous to us, and they may be able to help us with the Warlock. Now the problem is, we cannot trigger the Warlock from the platform, so someone needs to go down to the floor below, into Lost territory, and bring old Skullet Man into the fight. And I can think of none other than Ato as the lucky soul who scores this highly sought after position, being the bait. So the Warlock arrives and we begin by using a grenade to shred and destroy his cover, and then we open fire as well as tagging him with a lure. Now, I think my plan here was to have the Lost distract him, and then we could finish him early on our next turn. That would then give us ample time to focus on the sarcophagus on that same turn before any reinforcements come in. But the plan goes horribly wrong when Ato scores a crit for enormous damage and the Warlock actually gets eliminated prematurely. And as much as I've ragged on Ato in this run, this one was completely on me. I've spec'd Ato out with a crit build, so her chances of getting that crit were very high. That's something that I should have thought about and I didn't. Nonetheless, it is what it is and we just gotta roll with it. Now the problem is that Ato is now down with the Lost, and that lure that we used on the Warlock is going to do nothing to protect her because the Warlock's not there anymore. Now luckily she does have Implacable, so she can run to high ground to keep away from the Lost. So that's one problem solved, but we do have a second in that reinforcements are going to come in. Not to mention, when we attacked the Warlock, I actually repositioned some of the troops. That means we're not covering the ladders anymore and the Lost have a way up to us. So basically what I'm trying to say here is that I have completely botched this. Like everything I was trying to do, I've just messed it up. So from here, I decide we're just going to focus on the sarcophagus. That's generally always the best play, no matter how messed up things are looking on the battlefield. Just get rid of the sarcophagus, that's going to allow you to finish the mission. Now we are able to destroy it, which is really good, and we then throw a lure on the Advent reinforcements, which are 2 codexes. On the enemy turn, the first codex uses a psionic bomb, but it actually targets the Lost, not us, so that is just beautiful. As for the second codex, well, it just goes on Overwatch, same thing that the Warlock does when he reappears. And as is usually the case on this run, since the Lost move before we do, they're gonna take all of that Overwatch on our behalf. So thank you very much for that, Lost. However, they do hit the codex and they cause it to clone. That's a little bit annoying, but if we can just take out the Warlock, it's not going to matter. And that's pretty much the key here. There is a lot going on the battlefield, there's a lot of units, it's pretty chaotic, but it's all just a bunch of distractions. Our objective is the elimination of the Warlock, and that's what we're going to focus on, nothing else. Now once again we're able to grenade him, and we do some damage, and we shred his armor. The difference this time is his full cover is indestructible, so even though we've grenaded him, still difficult for our troops to hit him. But very fortunately, and I certainly didn't expect to be saying this, see, we have Harbinger of all people to the rescue. She can use her grappling hook to get in
close range
on the Warlock with the flank, and she inflicts extra damage on him too. So the Warlock goes down quite easily. Now given I made some pretty bad misplays here, we conquered this mission pretty emphatically. I guess I'm going to have to stop talking trash about Harbinger. For now. The next Guerilla op has the automated defenses sitrep, so there's a whole heap of robotic enemies. Like this first pod of 2 heavy mechs and a regular mech. Certainly not what you want to see. Plus, we're late enough into the game that sector pods are appearing by this stage. And as if all that's not bad enough, it's also a protect the device mission. Now, sector pods can walk into the device and destroy it instantly. We've seen that happen before. So we need to hurry if we want any chance of winning here. Now, I did come prepared and we kick things off with an EMP bomb, plus Leo has blue screen rounds so we can finish off one of the heavy mechs. And the second one actually gets shut down from the EMP. Then Leo's hair trigger activates, so he gets another attack. So things are actually looking really good this turn. It's going our way. We're able to wipe out all the remaining mechs. Now 2 codexes also activated on the same turn, so I tag them with a lure and that's it. I could attack them, but that's just going to cause them to clone, which is going to make more codexes, and that's just going to cause things to be worse for us. So we're better off just letting them attack us and we'll finish them on the next turn. We're going to leave them alone for now. Sadly, this time the codex uses the psionic bomb on us, not on the Lost. The second codex, however, it does target the Lost. So we haven't taken any damage, nothing too bad here. Now when it's our turn again, a whole heap of new Lost have poured into the mission, and the second we push forward, a pod with another Codex and 2 Spectres activates. So things are looking less good than they were just a minute ago. Now I had the idea of throwing the lure on the sector pod. I've caught a glimpse of where it is, so I know its location even though it hasn't actually activated yet. The problem is it's right next to the device that we have to protect. Now, I think it would have been fine if I had used it, since the AI, I believe, cannot use melee attacks on the device. But again, this is old footage, and at the time of playing, I was not aware of that. So back when I was playing this run, I was worried the Lost would target the device and trash it. So I decided to change the lure plan. I'm not going to throw it on the sector pod. But the good news is there's plenty of other enemies to tag, so we can just do that instead. Now we do have a meme beacon, and I could use it because there are a lot of enemies active, but I decide to save it since we're probably going to need it for the sector pod. And it turns out I make the right call. Not a single Advent unit actually attacks us this turn. They're all too distracted by the device and the Lost. So this went brilliantly. Then on our next turn, we do finally activate the sector pod and the mechs accompanying it. So I'm not looking forward to this. Now most of our squad is not in a good position to attack. We're only able to wipe out a single Spectre. All of those other enemies are still here. So it's a matter of throwing down both our mimic beacons and just hoping for the best. The beacons do their job and they keep us safe. Once again, we take no damage. And while that sounds good on paper, just have a look at the battlefield here. We are being absolutely swarmed by both Advent and Lost. And so it's here that I decide on perhaps a somewhat insane strategy. I actually opt to ignore the sector pod and focus on the other enemies, specifically the mechs. And my thinking here is the sector pod has so much health, it's probably going to take our entire turn to finish it off. Now meanwhile, that heavy mech, well, it can inflict huge damage itself. So I figure we're better off eliminating multiple weaker enemies, and then we're just going to hope for the best from the sector pod. As bad as the sector pod is, it's only one unit, and so it can only attack once. And that's better than multiple attacks from multiple other enemies, especially when some of those other enemies can hit quite hard. So I think I made the right play here, but it should highlight just how bad this situation is. I'm having to ignore a sector pod, one of the most dangerous enemies in the game. This is looking pretty dire. Now the good news is we do still have a lure, so at least we don't have to worry about the Lost, and that's really good because some of them are doing as much as 9 damage when they hit, so our soldiers will not last very long against them. And truthfully, the enemy turn ends up being a bit of a mixed bag. We get hit with a psionic bomb, which is really bad since a whole bunch of our weapons now need reloading. On the other hand, the sector pod attacks are lost, which is excellent. And check this out, headshot does not activate from the sector pod's cannon, so that's even better. Now after it's done this, it does still have another action, and it uses wrath cannon on the guys who are hit by the psionic bomb. And that is actually really bad, I have to be honest, because now we're faced with one of two options. We either reload and then attack. That means on the next turn, we're going to take damage from both the psionic bomb and the wrath cannon, and I'm pretty sure that's going to result in certain death. Now our other option is to relocate and then reload, but of course if we do that, it means that we cannot attack. So both of these choices are absolutely horrible. So I opt to just run away with all of our troops, not just the ones in the psionic bomb. We're going to try to get into full cover with everyone and just hope for the best. I know it's not the best strategy in the world, but it's all I've got here. Now the problem is, I don't think I've ever been hit with a wrath cannon before. I normally take down or otherwise disable the sector pod before it gets the chance to use the attack. So I'm not sure I've ever actually seen it before. And the result is that I wasn't 100% sure on how it worked. It turns out the lasers that the attack uses, they're actually not a great representation of the attack's actual AoE, in terms of where it's actually going to hit. See here, I thought Lucifer and Arctic were in danger of being hit by the Wrath Cannon, but it turns out they're actually safe. Instead, German guy here ends up getting hit, and that really took me by surprise. I figured he would be safe where he was, but he's not safe. He's one shot into the Shadow Realm. So lesson learned on that one, I guess. Now, as if losing a soldier isn't bad enough, we're also out of lures, so no more getting the Lost to do our dirty work for us. Now, thankfully, they are far enough away from us that they don't cause any damage, and they even wipe out one of the codexes for us, all on their own, so that's helpful. And then it's our turn again. Now, Nemrus is able to wipe out another codex. We're finally whittling down the enemy's numbers. It's taken way too long to do this. Then Minix has a 91% shot on the sector pod, and she misses. That's really what we need right now, just so helpful. Leo follows the trend, and he misses a 90% shot on one of the Lost. Just ridiculous. Now, despite these setbacks, Arctic and Lucifer are still able to finally get rid of the big tin can. So it can't do any more damage. I think it's just us and the Lost now. Which is good on paper, but a new Lost pod spawns in right at the end of our turn. I think it was the sector pod explosion that drew them in. And because of this, Leo ends up getting double teamed by 2 Lost. And with the damage they're doing, 2 is all it takes to convert him into one of the undead. That's 2 soldiers lost on the one mission. Up until now, I think that's how many we had lost on the whole campaign. So yeah, this one was very brutal. And it's not over yet. We've still got a whole bunch of loss to deal with, and honestly, I don't have much of a strategy. We just start spamming gunshots and we hope that the Lost fall down before we do. Now thankfully, that's pretty much what happens. Now Arctic does get trapped with them on the Lost's turn, but between Untouchable, Bladestorm, and the aid protocol that we've used on her, she's okay. She survives. Then we're able to wipe out the rest of the Horde without taking any further damage, and this one is finally over. Probably our worst mission to date, and in retrospect, I probably should have just evac'd out. Nonetheless, victory has been achieved. It just came at a very high price. 2 of our soldiers. So that was obviously horrible. I think we need to get things back on track, so let's hit the Forge mission. And you can see here the Shadow Chamber is telling us we have 60 enemies to deal with. All the usual Advent pods, plus the Lost that I added in manually. I might have gone a little bit overboard, but whatever, let's have some fun. Now while we're on the mission, I used the Skulljack on a codex, but the avatar doesn't actually spawn in. And I'm thinking the INI edits that I've made to the mission have somehow balked the game. So I can't blame XCOM jank this time. I think I was actually the cause of this. Now I try reloading the mission and using the Skulljack again, but it's the same problem. The avatar is nowhere to be seen. Seems like it's just not going to work. So then I decide to reload back to the strategic layer. We'll do the Forge mission later. The only reason I had deployed on it was because I wanted to Skulljack a codex, and there was a codex spawning on the mission. But if we can't do that, well, we've got another council mission to deploy on right now, so we might as well do that and save our troops from getting tired having to do 2 back-to-back missions. Now I know what you're thinking, can't we just use the Skulljack on the council mission? But sadly it has the Horde sit rep, so there's not going to be any codexes here. However, before too long we get a supply raid which does have a codex. So now we can use the Skulljack, and thankfully the avatar does appear like it normally should. It teleports quite a distance away, and that would normally be a bad thing, but here there is no need to worry. We have a secret weapon, and that secret weapon is Red Devil. I've buffed her aim very high, I think it's over 120, and she got Death from Above as a hidden skill. So we're able to run onto the top of the train carriage where she can eliminate a low HP stun lancer, This triggers Implacable, so that gives her another movement action. She's able to run forward towards the avatar, and then using run and gun, we can move even further towards the big boy and get the flank. At which point, Rapid Fire has a 100% chance to hit, and she obliterates this thing instantly. This was a truly glorious display. Nice work, Red Devil. As the mission proceeds, we activate a Gatekeeper and a couple of Archons. Now they're inside this building where we don't have line of sight on them, plus there's a whole bunch of Lost active. Also, did I mention we only have 4 soldiers for this one? We were restricted to 3 because of the sit rep that was active, and then we got an extra resistant soldier from a continental bonus. So I'm figuring, as powerful as Red Devil is, and the other soldiers that are there too, to be honest, this fight is just too risky. I don't want a repeat of the sector pod in the sewer, especially because, like I said, these are some of our most powerful units. Losing any of them would be quite the setback. So I opt to evac. We've already grabbed some of the loot crates, so even evacing out, the mission still counts as a victory, just means we have less resources as a reward, and I'm honestly fine with that. The main objective here was to take out the avatar, which we've done. And in retrospect, I'm not entirely sure why I was so obsessed with getting the avatar at this point in the game. Like, we could have reduced the avatar project at the Forge mission, could have left the Skulljack till later. Maybe what I was thinking was that it would be better to hold off on the Forge until the Hunter has been dealt with, thus making using the Skulljack the better option. I'm not entirely sure, but whatever, it doesn't matter, we've achieved what I wanted, that's all good. And speaking of the Hunter, how about we go eliminate him? Now I won't say too much about the first area because it's pretty much exactly the same as the Warlock's lair. There's a heap of Lost and a couple of turrets, and we just have to slowly battle our way through all of them. In the final chamber, our Templar Petrova has picked up Bladestorm, so running her into a bunch of Lost is a good way to kick off the combat, at least I think so. Now it's kind of annoying though, as the majority of the Lost avoid her and they actually start running towards the rest of the group. It's like they know they're going to get Bladestormed, so they avoid her. The zombies seem to be growing more intelligent, and that is honestly a really terrifying thought. Anyway, it's no big deal in this instance, as Jojo, a sharpshooter, he begins picking them off one by one, and he slaughters an absolute heap of them. Now I could leave the Lost alive, but that ended up being a really bad idea with the Warlock, it just didn't go how I wanted it to. So here we're going to play things safe, and we're just going to dispose of all of them. Then we'll take on the Hunter, and we start by shredding him with Drifter. Then a combined Claymore and Grenade can inflict good damage, and we're honestly able to finish him off quite easily. Some of our soldiers are rocking plasma weapons by now, so our sniper rifles are doing good damage on the sarcophagus, but despite this, we just don't have enough actions left to destroy it, so reinforcements are coming in. We use the usual strat, destroy the sarcophagus first and distract any enemies that we cannot eliminate using a mimic beacon. So then the Hunter's back with 50 HP, which is normally the case, and he does take extra damage from Reapers. So our boy Andre hits him with a ridiculous crit doing 14 damage, and once again, the Hunter does not last long. I don't think he was able to do anything, this was a real beatdown. And now that he's gone, we can do the Forge mission properly. By this point, our Grenadiers also have plasma weapons, and Drifter one-shots an Andromedon with chain shot. I mean, technically a two-shot because the attack hits twice, but you know what I mean. The point is, we've become extremely powerful, so we rip through the first couple of pods, including the Sector pod. Arctic hits with an insane 19 damage crit. This felt really good after that last Sector pod whooped us so badly. Now it's when we cross the bridge though, that's where things start going awry, which is honestly not entirely unusual for this mission. The positioning here can make things annoying. The problem this time is that I push up too far with our Reaper. Now what I didn't anticipate is Advent activating a pod of the Lost. The Lost move in towards us and they blow Andre's concealment. After his concealment has been blown, 2 Vipers and an Archon walk into his line of sight, so now they've activated as well. Now, as bad as this is, we actually get some really good luck with the Lost. Andre was absolutely surrounded, but most of the zombies decide to run towards either Advent or the rest of our squad. There's only a couple of them remain to actually attack Andre, and because of this, he survives. If more of these things had decided to target our boy, we could have easily lost him. So that did go badly, but it could have gone way worse. As far as the situation stands right now, it's not ideal. We have a whole heap of Lost and Advent active, and Ato actually triggers even more Lost when I move her forward, and the big issue is that most of the team is on the wrong side of the bridge and they have no means to get any decent line of sight on the enemies. So I resort to a strat that I've used a few times this run, and it's a pretty bad strat. We're going to throw the lure to send the Lost Advent's way, and then we're just going to hope for the best that Advent don't attack us. I try to spread out as best we can to avoid the Vipers poisoning us, but again, because of the bridge, our positioning is limited, so it's not easy doing that. And while the strat of crossing our fingers and blindly hoping for the best sounds terrible on paper, it actually works beautifully here. The Archon uses blazing pinions on a whole bunch of Lost, and then both Vipers opt to bind a Lost unit each. So once again, that undead horde just proved too juicy of a target for the aliens. This was fantastic. But it honestly gets even better as the Lost take out one of the Vipers on their turn. That's one less alien that we have to deal with. So then it's our turn again, and I stupidly misclick with Joker and I leave him out of cover. Now he is near a priest and he could come under attack, but my plan is that the priest is going to be too dead to do anything to him come Advent's turn, so hopefully the misclick won't matter. Now the trick to achieving this is implacable. We can run forward with Ato and take out a single Lost. Now this of course refunds her action, but it also triggers implacable. So just like Red Devil, she can move forward with a second blue move in the one turn, and she's able to cover so much distance doing this, it's just awesome. So she's able to get a slash on the priest, and I'm hoping she can blade storm it on the enemy turn to finish it off. And should that fail, we do have a Mimic Beacon as backup. Now I would have used it last turn, but we actually weren't able to throw it far enough forward for it to be of any use to us. But sure enough, the priest plan works perfectly as Ato blade storms him right to the next dimension. Meanwhile, the Archon targets the beacon and the Viper is still binding the Lost. So once again, no attacks made against XCOM. And then the Lost wipe out the second Viper and they inflict good damage on the Archon. Now when this encounter started, things were looking quite bad for us, but it's actually gone amazingly well. Those lures are basically turning the Lost into our own personal army. So we're able to wipe out the rest of the enemies, the Lost have outlived their usefulness, so we can take them out. And then we regroup our troops and we head inside the facility. And I should mention here, once again, we do have a Resistance operative joining us on the mission. Now she's not really that much use in combat, but she is able to carry the body that we find. The good thing about this is it leaves our entire team of high-level soldiers free to attack any enemies that cross us. So she's kind of useful as a pack mule, and I'm honestly glad that she's here. Now on our way to the evac zone, things do go a little bit sideways. We have the pod of reinforcements drop in, as well as 2 mutons and a spectre on the roof of the structure, and they drop down right on top of us at the same time. So this could be a little bit interesting. Now I should be expecting it by this stage. Drifter misses a 96% shot. The good thing here is that the Muton only has 1 HP left and Drifter's gun has a stock, so we take down the alien boy even though we missed. But yeah, still, 96%. Drifter sucks, I tell ya. We do still have 1 meme beacon at our disposal, so the enemies that we're not able to eliminate, we can distract them, they're not a problem. At least that's what I'm thinking until the priest finishes the beacon off when the purifier still has its turn left. This results in Arctic getting set on fire. Certainly not ideal there. Now the bad guys have taken up pretty horrible positioning for us. Basically, the pod from the roof is at one end of the building and the reinforcement pod is at the opposite end, so it's difficult to get line of sight on everybody. This, combined with sustain, leads to the priest and purifier surviving for another turn. But it's not gonna matter, because the priest makes a truly horrible play and he uses Holy Warrior on the purifier. Now the purifier itself is too far away to be able to attack us, so we're not taking any damage this turn. In the meantime, this priest, having already activated sustain, and with only 1 hit point remaining, well, he's pretty easy for us to dispose of course. And as he goes down, because of Holy Warrior, he takes the purifier to the grave with him. I would be so mad if I was that purifier. The priest did him absolutely dirty here. And so after that pretty abysmal failure on Advent's part, we're done with the bad guys and we can finally evac out of here. Now, even though we've taken a couple of injuries, everyone is alive, that's what counts. This mission went really well. Meanwhile, on the strategic layer, things are looking good as we score +1 damage to our beam weapons. That's going to be very helpful. And then we finally contact the Assassins region, and this is interesting. Her strengths are Soul Stealer, Mech Lord, Blast Padding, Kinetic Plating, and Low Profile. So the first thing to notice there is that she has a lot of strengths, and it's because we're fairly late into the game. But those last 3 are a brutal combination. She cannot be hurt by grenades, so we're going to need to shoot at her. But when we do shoot, Low Profile is going to make it hard to hit, so we're very likely to miss. And then when we do miss, Kinetic Plating is going to give her shield points. Yeah, just a really brutal combo here. However, her weaknesses are not too bad. Weakness to Templars and Brittle. So if we can hit her with a Rend from Petrova, well, A, we don't have to worry about missing, and B, we're gonna do big damage. So definitely a mixed bag there, some really bad abilities, but also some that work to our advantage. Now naturally she appears on the next mission, and I gotta show you this, it's just glorious. Our boy Dread Knight is a sharpshooter, and I've been buffing his aim to absurd levels the entire run, just like Red Devil. But even more than that, I've given him a Wraith suit, so he can instantly grapple onto the roof and flank the assassin. From here, he can use Lightning Hands for a free attack on the turret, and then using the Hunter's Rifle, he can shoot at the turret again, finishing it off. This then triggers Death from Above, so he's ready to attack yet again. But see, even that's not enough for this beast of a man, because he's picked up Run and Gun as a hidden skill. So we can activate that, and that then allows him to use Fan Fire without ending his turn. Fan Fire is 3 pistol shots, all on the assassin. And then, thanks to Run and Gun, once Fan Fire is over, he can attack again with the rifle. So in one turn, this man has scaled across a building and made 6 attacks. And this is honestly one of the things I love about XCOM 2 the most. You can get some extremely OP soldiers, and it's just so satisfying. Now, as good as all this is, Dread Knight's certainly putting in the work here. The assassin has 52 HP. So even with all those attacks, plus a rapid fire from Arctic, we're not even close to finishing the Dreadlock lady off. She summons in 2 heavy mechs that immediately go on Overwatch, and then something kind of cool happens. The assassin rushes Arctic, who hits her with a Blade Storm, but then the assassin strikes with her katana, so it was kind of like these two had a mini sword duel, and that's pretty cool. Now what's not cool is that Arctic is dazed and down to half health. So even though the duel was a cool concept, we definitely came out on the losing end of it. So Ato moves in on the assassin and it's just absurd. We use rapid fire, which lands a 21 damage crit first, followed by an 18 damage crit second. The assassin is no more. That's 39 damage through her armor. So yeah, Ato has well and truly redeemed herself since the early game. She is a monster. Senpai would be proud. Then Dreadnought is able to utilise Quick Draw as well as Death from Above to get rid of both heavy mechs all by himself. Man, our team is getting so strong. Once we're done with the Assassin, the Lost show up and we do the usual thing and send them Advent's way. And check this out, Dreadnought goes for a 94% pistol shot and he misses. The man may be a walking war crime, but none of us are perfect. Now there's only one heavy mech left and I get a little bit overconfident. So I could have used a mean beacon, but I figured we wouldn't need it. And this is an extremely risky play, bordering on a stupid play in fact. But once again, the Lost are just too tempting a target for Advent, and the robot uses its missiles on a bunch of Lost, and even though Ato is caught in the blast, she has Untouchable, so she takes no damage. Then the remaining Lost either eat a Blade Storm or they go after the mech. So we got really lucky there. If that mech had taken aim at our troops on the roof, things could have gone really badly for us, but that didn't happen, so we win this mission. That's awesome. Then we get hit with a Guerilla op pretty much instantly, which is obnoxious. The game does this sometimes, you just get two missions really close together, and with the will mechanic, it's annoying. So we're going to have to send some low-level soldiers, though we do still have some heavy hitters, such as Red Devil. Now sadly, it's a sewer mission, so exploiting Death from Above isn't going to be the easiest thing to do. And between the sewer map and the low-level soldiers, this mission honestly goes pretty badly. We push too far forward with Red Devil and get a bad sector pod activation. And it's the same thing as the last mission, I'm just getting too cocky for my own good. I need to slow things down a little bit. Our soldiers are powerful, but they're not unstoppable. And now we've got a heavy mech to our side, a sector pod and the Advent underlings in front, and a legion of Lost swarming, well, everywhere. Now Red's not in cover, so the best I can do is an aid protocol, but sure enough, it works and Advent goes after the Lost. And the basic idea for this run is that if we can make our defense high enough, as in higher than the Lost, well, Advent are normally going to target the units they have the best chance to hit. So as long as our defense is higher than the Lost, then in theory we should be safe. Now, I would have evac'd out on the next turn. I've learned my lesson from the last sector pod encounter in a sewer, but the problem here is that the priest has put Jojo in stasis. So we need to stick around at least one more turn since I don't want to leave him behind. We're able to dispose of both the sector pod and the mech, which are the biggest threats, and then we throw down a mimic beacon to keep the other enemies off our backs. So thankfully we do survive to the next turn, and it's mainly because all the Lost are too far away from us to attack. If they were closer, we could have been in trouble, we would have had to take them out. And so it's at this point I decide we need to leave. We've completed the primary objective already, which means we've stopped the dark event, and there's just so many Lost all over the place. Surely there's some behind walls and corners that we can't see and could jump out and attack us. I figure staying here is just too risky. We've seen with Leo how effective the Lost can be at ambushing us on these types of maps, and I do not want to risk that here. So it's too dangerous. We're calling it a day. See you later. Once the colonels are ready for combat, we deploy to the assassin's base. This will be only the second time we've encountered her on the field, and I'm hoping it'll be the last. In the elevator room, a bunch of Lost swarm us. Now, we can destroy enough of them to carve a path that we can run through and we can just hit the elevator and bounce. The problem is, if we do that, Andre is going to have his concealment blown. So I decide Arctic's going to use her shotgun to blow away just enough Lost to create a one-tile wide path for Andre to take and keep his concealment. Now that's some pretty good teamwork, I gotta say. So the assassin spawns in, we locate her relatively quickly, and here I gotta share with you some absolute nonsense. So we move in with Andre. Now he has Banish and Shred, which I figure should be a lethal combo. Now just look at this. The game tells me the chance to hit is 100%, but after he uses his free reload, the chance drops to 87%. So I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but anyway, it shouldn't be a big deal. 87% is still a pretty high chance to hit. We should be fine, right? Well, have a look. Out of his 6 shots at 87% chance to hit, he only connects with 3. Now sure, low profile would have kicked in at some point and made the assassin more difficult for him to hit, but even then, it's still a 67% chance to hit, not 50. And even besides that, he missed the very first shot, which had no low profile to worry about at all. So after 6 shots, this guy has done 13 damage. Now may I remind you, with 2 shots, Ato did 3 times that amount on the assassin. This guy just sucks. He is a loser. Now thankfully we've also got Petrova, and she can help even the odds with a huge 24 damage rend on the assassin. And this is something that's really nice about having so many lost on every mission. It's very easy to score eliminations with the Templar and build up their focus quickly, so then they're doing maximum damage. Now I try for a 90% slash with Arctic, and she channels her inner Andre and misses. However, it actually doesn't end up mattering as things go our way on the enemy turn. The assassin summons in 2 mechs, and this triggers Petrova's Blade Storm, and she just slices Lady Dreadlock's right off the side of the platform. So I'm really happy that we have at least one soldier who can hit the side of a barn. I start attacking the sarcophagus, but after doing this for a bit, I realised that 2 heavy mechs is actually really scary, so we should probably do something to deal with them. I'm gonna break my rule of always going after the sarcophagus. So we eliminate one, and then I move Ato in to rapid fire the second, and despite her hit chance being 95%, she misses one of the shots and the mech survives. And I have to say, this is infuriating. What is going on with these guys? We have a Chrysalid and Berserker spawn in as reinforcements, and that's pretty dreadful. But luckily, Ato is able to redeem herself, and she gets rid of the mech with a Blade Storm. So at least that thing's not going to attack us. After that, it's our turn again, and we're both able to destroy the sarcophagus and the Chrysalid. Now the Berserker does survive, but we can do the usual thing and just use a Mimic Beacon to shut it down. And with all that being done, here comes the Assassin once more, and let's see if we can finish her quickly, because this mission is really annoying me. We've got an 81% rupture with Drifter, and do I even need to say anything? You know what's coming. Of course he misses. So these soldiers seem completely incompetent. Pretty much what we're going to have to do is move in close enough that the hit chance is 100. Because if it's anything less than that, these guys are going to miss. Now to his credit, Drifter's holo targeting does help us with that. And that's pretty much what we do. We charge right up to the assassin, and we make our hit chance high enough that even these clowns who don't have eyes literally cannot miss. And the assassin is soon defeated, but I feel zero sense of accomplishment. I'm honestly just annoyed. This mission had such ridiculously awful RNG. We should have won so much sooner. But anyway, the good news is it's done. Let's move on with our lives and never speak of this garbage ever again. We're able to research the assassin's weapons just in time before the base defense triggers. Like, this was so close, we just got in there. So we gear out the best troops we have, and away we go. And we actually get really lucky with the map. There's a house right next to the deployment zone. So this allows us to grapple onto the roof with Red Devil, who can immediately begin exploiting death from above. Now 2 heavy mechs have gone on Overwatch, but she has Shadow Step, so she can get into position and wipe them out. Once that's done, Dread Knight can then safely use his grapple to get onto the roof and start dealing damage himself. And between these 2 soldiers, we absolutely obliterate the Advent units before us. The only thing that survives is a priest, and that only happened because of sustain. So with his 1 HP, the priest runs to the Avenger, but he finds himself face to face with Drifter. And at this range, even our boy can't miss, so the priest is promptly turned into paste. Meanwhile, another pod has activated, but we just mow them down straight away as well. Honestly, this is turning into a bit of a slaughter. And I should mention here, there's no lost on this mission. I didn't modify the INI files for this one. I was mostly just afraid about breaking the objectives and that it wouldn't work, so I left it alone. So bad guys continue activating as we push towards the disruptor, and our snipers on the roof continue destroying them instantly. The only time we're in trouble is when Red finally reaches the device and there's 2 Spectres and an Andromedon protecting it. Now that's a lot of HP, and I'm not sure that we're going to be able to deal with it, at least not in one turn. So I come up with a plan which I think is pretty good. We can blow up the cover of one of the Spectres, and then Devil can take a 90% shot. Now my plan is to score an elimination with her, which will trigger Untouchable and turn her into a living Mimic Beacon. And while she does land the attack, we get a dodge and the Spectre survives. So that's really, really bad. No kill, no Untouchable. However, in what is perhaps a little bit of a twist, it's Harbinger to the rescue once more, as she can use Combat Presence to give Red a second action. So Red promptly uses this to obliterate the Spectre. Harbinger then lands Justice on the second Spectre and pulls it into our lines, and this makes it very easy for our soldiers to take it down. Harbinger's really on a redemption arc here. She was clutch this turn. Now meanwhile, Drifter has an 80% shot on the Spectre, but I know better than to take it. That is an obvious trap. We're going to use hail of bullets to ensure that our man doesn't miss. So that leaves only the Andromedon left, and we can stand Red right next to it to bait the punch. And she's going to take 0 damage from this attack thanks to Untouchable. But it's actually even better than that. We get to attack the Andromedon with Bladestorm, and the thing's punch destroys its cover. That's going to drastically increase our sniper's chance of hitting it, and this thing is about to get absolutely wrecked. And as if things weren't going well enough, Dread Knight gets a hair trigger proc, so that allows him to dispose of the Disruptor and the Andromedon this turn. Then it's a matter of rushing back towards the Avenger as quickly as we can. Reinforcements are dropping in on us, so the sooner we can leave, the better. Now the troops back at the ship are able to hold off the single pod of reinforcements, and that's actually all the time that we need to get everybody on board and evac out. So basically this was an absolute trouncing. Advent never seemed to have a chance. This was the easiest base defense that we've had in quite a while, and it's really because we're not doing a solo class run. Having the combination of Ranger, Sharpshooter, and Skirmisher abilities synergized really well, and it made this an easy outing. And seeing as things are going so well, how about we hit the Psionic Gate mission? Now we start off near this barn, which I think is based on an enemy within map, and it's pretty cool, I like this one. So I run Red Devil out and use the grappling hook to get her onto the edge of the barn where she spots some Advent and a bunch of Lost. And yes, I have added Lost to this mission as well. Now on the enemy turn, the bad guys activate, and the captain does spot Red, but since Advent has already scattered, they're not able to attack her, so we're good. The only real downside is the Lost do begin charging at us. On our turn, the trees are causing us some line of sight problems, so we just blow them all up. And that makes it much easier to target the enemies. Then I use Face Off with Blue, and it's just crazy. She does 14 damage on the mech with the Hunter's pistol. Now that does include extra damage from blue screen rounds, but even so, 14 HP with a pistol, and it wasn't even a crit. This is just wild. And as you would probably expect, the enemies here do not last very long. As we push forward, the presence of Lost on the mission has some pretty interesting side effects. Firstly, it causes most of the chrysalids to fight the Lost instead of hiding underground. So this is good for us since we don't have to worry about being ambushed from hiding chrysalids. The problem with it is that the Lost are kind of useless at fighting back. So the chrysalids are wiping out the zombies while the Lost mostly just stand around and let themselves get destroyed. And every time one of those Lost goes down to a chrysalid, they turn into a cocoon, and they're going to start spawning more of the bugs. And in the space of one turn, 2 lost get turned into cocoons. Those cocoons have a lot of HP, so this is not good. So on our turn, we need to start eviscerating the lost as quickly as we can. We don't want the chrysalids finishing them off and turning them into cocoons. We gotta do it ourselves. Now fortunately, the team by this stage is more than up to the task and we smoke every lost that is in our range of sight. Unfortunately, it turns out one of the chrysalids was still underground and it ambushes us, so Red takes a hit. Now we can heal her, it's not a big problem, then we just continue fighting our way through a group of chrysalids. And while we're able to cut them down, the problem is that behind that group there is a second group still fighting lost, and they're just too far away for us to see. I've just gotten a glimpse of them every now and then. So this means more cocoons are being created. We need to act quickly or we could find ourselves being overrun. The problem is moving forward is potentially going to activate the gatekeeper and then that's going to slow us down. So this really is a case of damned if we do, damned if we don't. But in these situations, we do still have to make a call, and I decide we're just going to activate the gatekeeper because if we don't push forward, we're never going to win this mission. We're going to be stuck here forever. But surprisingly, at least to me, as we move up, we don't actually activate the big egg. Even with Red standing on this elevated position, I thought for sure that would do it, but apparently not. So I am surprised here, but it's a pleasant surprise. So we begin hammering the enemies with all the firepower we can muster, and it doesn't take us too long to mop them all up. And once they're gone, we can safely deal with the gatekeeper since it's all on its own. So we start off trying for the shred, which we miss, so that's always nice. We do still have some grenades, so we can use those to shred instead. Now it does take us 2 turns to destroy the big boy, but I was saving a mean beacon for exactly this scenario. So the team is safe, we don't take any damage, and honestly, we've been battling gatekeepers for a while now, so the team is up to it, it's not too bad. After this, a few more missions pass, but they're all fairly by the numbers. Our troops have become extremely powerful by this stage and we can handle ourselves quite well. So there's not too much to say, and sure enough, before too long we've finished all the story research and we are ready to finish this campaign. And you know it, of course I've added Lost to the final missions as well. The Network Tower is our Ranger Arctic, our Sharpshooter Blue and our Templar Petrova. Now all 3 of these soldiers are very powerful, but I'm taking mean beacons on all of them for 2 reasons. One is simply because we can, and the second reason I'll talk about a little later. For right now, let's just get into it. So a pod of a Codex and a Viper activate and they trigger a massive swarm of Lost with them, to the point that the Lost just immediately wipe the pod out on their first turn. There's a lot of them, and they're aggressive it seems. And the great thing about this is that it happened on the opposite side of the map, so it's left our side completely clear of enemies. So we're just going to push forward and try and keep our concealment. However, we do not get to keep our concealment. My plan backfires horribly when we run onto the roof of a nearby building and there's a pod waiting right there for us. I was not expecting them to be on the roof, but there they are, an Archon and a Spectre. And we only have 2 soldiers to deal with them since Petrova's turn has been used up yellow dashing. Now we did get run and gun on all our soldiers as an intel bonus, so I move Blue forward to get closer to the Archon, and she can land a clutch 70% lightning hands to do 9 damage on the flying boy. She can then use a fan fire to finish it off. Now, I could have used the sniper rifle, its chance to hit was 100%, but the thing about fanfire is it doesn't end the turn. Not if it's the first action, or if we've used it with run and gun. So I figure 3 shots at 70% to hit should take the Archon out, and it turns out that was the right decision. And by doing this, it then leaves us with another pistol shot that we can make on the Spectre. So essentially, we got to shoot 4 times with the pistol instead of once with the rifle. So a higher risk for sure, but also a higher reward, and it paid off. Meanwhile, Arctic picked up Hail of Bullets as a hidden ability, so even though she has a shotgun and she's quite a distance away from the Spectre that's in full cover, None of that actually matters. We can bypass her terrible hit chance and ensure that Spectre's destruction. So this pod is gone. Really nice work from these two here. The problem we now face is that with our concealment gone, that zombie horde is coming for us. And when you're surrounded by a small army of shambling monsters who are intent on ripping you to pieces, there's really only one thing to do, and that's use Blue. Her pistol can inflict 6 to 9 damage and her rifle 10 to 12, and I'm not sure exactly how many lost there are here, and I don't really have the patience to count them all, but you can see for yourself, there is a lot of them. And Blue, between her pistol and rifle, she takes out all but 2 of them by herself. It is just a massacre. And not having to reload the pistol really helps her rack up that kill count. Now as for the 2 lost that survive, one is because she doesn't have line of sight on it, and the second one was because it had 14 HP, which in retrospect I may have been able to take out with 2 pistol shots, but it wasn't guaranteed. I used the rifle and we've left it on 2 HP, but either way, just a display of utter dominance by Blue. It seems every time we need her to lay waste to an army of enemies, she is there, at the ready, up for the task. I love it. And leaving the beefy Lost on 2 HP, it's actually perfect for us because it gives Petrova a very easy elimination to build up her focus. I think that rhymed and I didn't intend it to. Anyway, the last Lost, it has 4 HP and it gets obliterated by Arctic with a 15 damage crit. So a dominating performance from the squad here. And I think that's all the Lost on the map. They were all clustered together. Now there is another Advent pod that does require us to use a Mimic Beacon. It's a Sectoid and an Archon, so it's not a hugely dangerous pod. They just activated a really long way away from us, so we were in a bad position and that made us take an extra turn to get rid of them. In addition to that, of course there's going to be one last pod right on top of the objective, but we're going to use the tried and true strategy of running and gunning right past them. We activate the ability and then we just dash to the objective and hack it. No combat required. This mission's over. A hugely successful outcome for this trio. They did really well. And now for the climax. You can see the team here, 2 rangers, 2 sharpshooters, a grenadier and a specialist. I didn't actually use any psyops this run. They're not as useful against Lost as they are Advent, so I didn't really think it was worth it. And regular viewers may notice my choice of items here is quite different from the usual. Hardly any blue screen rounds or meme beacons. Yeah, that's not like me. Now remember what I said about the beacons on the network tower? Well, the second reason that I took so many on that last outing is because I wasn't planning on using all that many here. The reason for that is the way I've edited this final mission, it's a little bit different to the other story missions. See, in the other ones, I left the Advent pods and just added in a bunch of Lost. I couldn't do that here. On this one, I actually removed quite a few Advent and I replaced them with Lost. I kept the Sector pod and Gatekeeper pods, but the rest of Advent have all been taken out. Now, I didn't want to do it this way, but it was necessary. My PC is getting on in years, and it often struggles with this Leviathan mission even before any modifications have been made, so I knew adding in a ton of Lost would just kill my PC's performance. And if you want to watch the stream in full on my archive channel, you'll see that even without Advent, the mission still chugged as if I was playing Cyberpunk on launch day. So removing Advent to reduce the enemy count was the only option to literally keep the mission playable. So hence, with mostly just Lost on the field, blue screens and Mimic Beacons are a lot less useful. Having our sharpshooters able to use face-off with dragon rounds, setting legions of Lost on fire all at once, I think that's probably going to be more useful overall. And honestly, I don't have too much to say here. You know how this thing is going to go down. We're about to slaughter a small village's worth of Lost. We are the bringers of death, the reapers of souls, and we are eating well tonight. You know, it's kind of weird. We started this run facing off against monsters, but now I think we've become the monsters. There's a deep philosophical message hidden in there somewhere for sure, but I'm not going to worry about that. We need to wrap up this campaign. And of course, I filled the final chamber with Lost as well. And there's no pods being replaced here. Advent reinforcements are still going to start dropping in all around us, plus we got all these zombie boys to deal with. And this actually leaves me with kind of a predicament that I need to consider. Do we slaughter these Lost like the dogs they are? Or do we keep them alive, hoping they engage Advent in combat, which is going to take the heat off us? And I opt for somewhere in the middle. We're going to take out some Lost, mainly the dashes and any that are too close to us, but we're going to keep the others alive and hope that they disrupt Advent. So Dread Knight starts laying waste to the zombies, while the rest of the squad focuses on escaping the Lost's movement range. Now this means we're not able to take out the first avatar on the turn that we activate it, and I'm thinking that might be a first for this channel. It's definitely a record I'd have rather not broken, but here we are, and it leads to Dread Knight all on his own on that side of the map being mind controlled. And this is really on me. I left him quite vulnerable by not having any backup there with him. But the irony is not lost on me that the end of this campaign seems to be going the same way that it started. Dread Knight getting mind controlled. So Drifter's able to cut down a few more Lost just to avoid us being overwhelmed, and then he can drop a frost bomb on the avatar. Now this works in two ways. One, it breaks the mind control, so Dread Knight's back on our team, which is what we want. And two, it prevents the avatar from teleporting away. And since we have it flanked, it's in a really good position for us, so not being able to reposition is going to be this boy's downfall. With Dread Knight back on the team, he cuts through some more Lost, and then he takes aim at the avatar, and the great thing here is that this man has acquired Shred as a hidden perk, so he can take out the avatar's armor, which is obviously very helpful. Red then deploys the Hunter's Axe on our opponent. First she lobs one at him, and then she runs in for the melee attack, and this onslaught sends the avatar to the next dimension. And speaking of avatars, this isn't a solo class run. That means we can use our avatar. So one of those codexes who spawned in as a reinforcement, it's now on our side. And these guys can be really useful on this mission. Being able to teleport to flank the avatar and then shoot it, causing it to teleport, can be a clutch move. If the avatar is in a hard to reach position for your troops, a codex can be a great counter to force it to teleport somewhere that's a bit easier for you to work with. By the time the second avatar arrives, I think there's only one Lost left, and it's a brute. They just kept targeting us instead of Advent, so we had no choice but to put them down. They really weren't helping us at all. Turns out the Lost are a lot less useful when you don't have any lures. I know, shocking, who would have guessed that? And I guess I should mention that here, I actually opted not to bring lures on this mission because I thought it would make this part of the game too easy. So the lack of lures, it wasn't a bad play, it was a deliberate choice that I made just to raise the tension a little bit and keep things interesting. Now Dread Knight is the closest to the avatar and its bodyguards, but he's also getting swarmed by Faceless. So we want to attack the avatar, but we also don't want to leave him vulnerable on the next turn. Now luckily for us, he has Serial, and we're not using the cringe Long War version that reduces damage with each attack. Nah, we're using regular Serial, and our boy is inflicting full damage with every shot. So those Faceless are powerless against his might. Now as for the avatar's crew, we can only gank a single sectoid, so it still leaves a lot of bad guys remaining. So while we could shred with Dread Knight's rifle, I instead opt for a pistol shot. Now my thinking is that unlike the rifle, the pistol is not gonna end the turn. So we can force the avatar to teleport, and then Dread Knight can relocate to a safer position. And I'm hoping the avatar's gonna teleport to a better position that makes it more accessible to the rest of our squad, but that's not what happens. The avatar doesn't cooperate and it barely moves at all. So it's up to Red Devil with run and gun to save the day. You'll see here I grapple into what may look like a weird position. I just didn't want to leave her flanked by the remaining enemies, and this was the best cover that I could get for her, or at least that I spotted. Now that doesn't end up mattering though. Her rapid fire actually finishes the avatar off. I don't think that was guaranteed to happen, but it has happened, and that means not only does her untouchable activate, but so does implacable. So she's able to move to a safer position, and she's going to avoid the first attack made against her. Really clutch play from Red here. Without her, I suspect we would have been in quite a bit of trouble on the next enemy turn. As it stands, I think we're in a pretty good position. Now Jojo wipes out the final Lost, and I don't think we're going to see another one in this campaign. So rest in peace, Lost. It's been real. Red's untouchable saves her from the first Andromedon attack, but she then takes big damage from the second. She is still alive though, so that's okay. And meanwhile, the remaining sectoid, he runs in and raises the avatar as a zombie. The Lost may be gone, but this alien boy is keeping the undead theme alive for this video. Bless this oddly shaped naked man. On our turn, we finally use the Mimic Beacon to hold off the Andromedons. They've just got too much HP for us to deal with, and soon enough it's time for the final avatar. And honestly, I don't think it's gonna be hanging around for very long. Cowboy Deleter procs Guardian on the avatar, and he hits the alien boss with 2 critical hit Overwatches. Yeah, 1 wasn't enough, he's just showing off. And I think the Codex actually hit an Overwatch too, so that was also pretty nice. And all this results in the avatar being down to a measly 9 HP when our turn begins. So we run in with Dreadnought and we unload with Fanfire. It's total overkill, and the avatar is no more. We are victorious. And this is the thing that I really wanted to see after the run was over. The number of enemies defeated. 1,583. Now that says aliens, but I'm 99% sure it includes Lost as well. A huge number of bad guys defeated, and I think that's really cool. And so there you have it, the question has been answered. You can indeed defeat XCOM 2 in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. And this one was always intended to be a bit more of a gimmick run than a challenge run, just a bit of fun to get into the Halloween spirit. Now that being said, the early game was precarious when the Lost could one-shot us, but yeah, the late game, that was a bit of a stomping. So we're going to wrap things up here, and apologies it's been so long between videos. I planned to release one in September, but like I said, I've been really sick, so that one had to get delayed. It is still in the works and it is going to come out, but in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this run, and I hope it was worth the wait. So I'll be back with another video soon. I hope you'll join me for that when it releases. Remember to like, comment and subscribe if you want to support the channel. And remember, I have a Patreon where you can get early access to videos just like this one for only a few bucks a month. The link to that is in the description if you're interested. Now thank you very much for watching and giving me your time. And until next time, have a great day.